Welcome to Alchemy, the podcast for HR professionals who are ready to experience what's possible from the inside out. I'm your host, Sarah Maud, former HR insider and transformational coach. And I'm here to guide you into a new paradigm of HR leadership with the science, the energy, and the insights that create true, lasting transformation. So subscribe and join the movement, and let's create the future of HR together. Hello and welcome back. And in today's episode, I'm going to be inviting you to reflect on who it is that you are being when you are doing. So let me explain. Now, one of the biggest things that I'm seeing across the HR community at the moment, and in fact have been seeing for a long time now, is the struggle with burnout. In fact, I ran an HR webinar last year on how to prevent HR burnout. I had 77 people turn up live to that call. And I asked the question, how many of them have experienced burnout? And every single hand in that webinar went up. In fact, there was probably over 50% of them that had experienced multiple cycles of HR burnout. So if you've experienced burnout or you're experiencing it right now, then trust me, you are not alone. And maybe you've even changed jobs, thinking that that would resolve things, that the stress, the struggle, the burnout, it's coming from this particular job, this environment, this industry, this culture, this organization, this particular leadership team, only to find yourself in a new HR role 6 months in and you're coming up against the same kind of issues. And maybe you've even accepted that this is the way that it is working in HR. That HR, it's complex, it's relentless, it's part of the job. Maybe you've told yourself that working in HR is always going to be busy, always going to be stressful. But what if it wasn't? What if there was a different way? A way that you can stay in the profession without burning out? A profession that I know you absolutely love. But maybe right now you're questioning if you can remain in the profession because it's just not sustainable. And maybe there's a number of things that you've done. Maybe you've done insights training. Maybe you've read some self-help books. Maybe you've tried meditation. Maybe you've attended some stress management training, and yet something isn't shifting. And the truth is the reason it isn't shifting isn't actually the job. Now, I'm not saying that HR can't be demanding at times. I spent over a decade working in HR for Virgin Atlantic, British Airways, Debenhams, when there was still leaders on the high street, Carnival UK, the NHS. So I absolutely get that the nature of the role can be gritty. If I think about some of the, particularly the ER cases that I had to deal with, they were complex. They were emotionally taxing. But what I've seen over the last 14 years working as a therapist and a coach and a resilience trainer is that our experience of anything, our experience of the doing comes from who we are being in that moment. And whether who we are being is our natural self or who we are being is our normal, conditioned, habitual response self. So, our natural self is who we naturally are when we're not in our thinking. So, think about when you've had an experience of looking at your to-do list on a particular day and feeling completely overwhelmed, looking at that to-do list and thinking that everything's urgent. You're not quite sure where to start. It feels like you're standing at the bottom of a mountain and you've got to get up to the top of it and you're wearing a pair of 6-inch heels. But then there are other days that you can look at the same list, same priorities, but you feel calm. You're present, you're grounded. You know what it is that you need to do, what it is that you need to focus on first. Maybe there are days that you're knocking things off that list and you're high-fiving yourself in the process. Now, what do you make of that? Same list, nothing in the outer world has changed, but your experience of it is very different. And the biggest illusion that people are operating from is the illusion that the way that they are feeling is coming from the outer world. It's coming from the external environment. And the reason that we fall into this illusion is because when we're experiencing, feeling any of the nuances of stress, we could be experiencing overwhelm, could be experiencing frustration, impatience, anger, anxiety, fear, insecurity. All of those are nuances of stress. And when we're feeling that way, the brain is always looking for cause and effect. The mind's trying to justify, why do I feel the way that I feel? And so we make these assumptions that the way that I feel is because of this particular project that I'm working on, because of this particular situation that I've got going on, because of my to-do list, because of how many people want a piece of me and I just don't have enough hours in the day. That the way that I'm feeling is because I'm in a new role and there's just so much to learn and I'm not really sure what it is that I'm doing. We're always creating these associations. It's what the brain naturally does. It creates this association and it's an associating machine. It's always looking for cause and effect. But the last place that most people look to understand why they're experiencing what they're experiencing is the inner world, who they're being. What's the quality of your thinking? What's the narrative that's running through the mind? And I'll tell you a really beautiful story. One of the HR directors that came along to this webinar that I ran last year, she'd experienced multiple cycles of burnout. And when I started to introduce this understanding of what is actually creating burnout isn't coming from the job, but is coming from who you're being, your experience of the job in any given moment, she started to realize, oh, It's not the job. I have to change me. And that moment of recognition for her was a huge catalyst of change. She realized that who she was being when she was doing the work is she was being somebody that put everybody else's needs before her own. Who she was being was somebody that wasn't prioritizing her own mental health and well-being. Who she was being was a people pleaser. Who she was being was somebody that was always trying to prove herself, that was putting on all this artificial pressure to be seen as good enough. Who she was being was coming from the identity that I'm not good enough, that I have to be seen to be good enough. So I'm going to keep pushing myself. I'm going to say yes, even when I've got no capacity to take on any extra work. And so what resulted in that was burnout. But burnout's the smoke, it's not the actual fire. And because she'd never seen burnout from this perspective, she'd always just made the assumption that it is the job, that working in HR is always going to be busy, it's always going to be stressful. That's the narrative, that's the story. And if we are working in a way where we're trying to constantly prove ourselves, if we feel like we're imposters and that we're scared that we're going to get caught out, and so we try to prove ourselves even more, we're trying to prevent that from happening. If we're constantly comparing ourselves and judging ourselves, if we are being perfectionists, if we're really struggling with control and delegation because who we're being is somebody that's scared of letting go of control. So you end up with double the workload instead of delegating it perhaps to your team. If you're being somebody that is always saying yes, when really your body's saying, no, no, I can't do anymore, then the fallout of that will be burnout. But that burnout isn't coming from the job. It's coming from these inner, habitual, conditioned patterns, these beliefs, these thoughts that effectively are running the show 95 to 98% of the time. And this is the one thing that nobody teaches HR professionals is about conditioning. So conditioning is a thought pattern, a behavior, an emotional response, a way of showing up in the world that's become so automatic, so habitual, it becomes a conditioned way of being. And if we consider that 95 to 98% of the time that we are operating from our conditioned habitual responses, then how can we expect anything to change? If we're operating from the level of the unconscious mind, then just like a computer that's running all of these different applications and programmings, this operating system, then that is influencing who we're being when we're doing. And these conditioned responses aren't just about mindset. This is where so much of the stress management stress management training fails, because it teaches people coping mechanisms. It teaches people how to cope with stress, how to potentially cope with pressure. But that's like giving somebody that's gotten a broken leg a sticking plaster. It's not really going to do the job that you want it to do, because so much of the training out there is still operating from this very old paradigm that stress is something that happens to us, that stress is coming from our outer environment. So these conditioned responses, they're not just simply about mindset, they actually extend to the most powerful motherboard within you, which is the autonomic nervous system. And your nervous system is a complex intelligence network that's running the body. It's the nervous system where we hold memories, we hold fear, we hold trauma, we hold behaviors like perfectionism and procrastination and people pleasing, all of which lead to emotional overfunctioning in the role. So if our nervous system is coming from a conditioned response, if the nervous system isn't regulated, well, then we will be experiencing anxiety. We will be experiencing the need for control. We'll experience an inability to manage your emotions. So if you've been operating from an unregulated nervous system, it's like one thing can happen, like you receive a particular email or a call, and it completely sends you over the edge. You crumble, you're irritable, you're grumpy, you're frustrated. An unregulated nervous system looks like perfectionism, drama, relationship drama, physical problems, headaches, gut problems. It can look like actually being addicted to stress. And you might think, why would anybody be addicted to stress? And it's a great question. Why would anybody be addicted to stress? But the truth is, we do get addicted to our emotions. And I've lost count of the amount of people that have said to me that they need stress to be able to perform well, that they need stress to be able to thrive, that stress gives them that adrenaline to be able to push through. But people that are operating from this belief, well, they're going to be addicted. If they believe that stress is something that they need, something that's fueling them in a good way, then they're going to be addicted to creating stress in their life. And for those people, what strikes me is that they don't really understand the neuroscience of stress. Because the truth is, stress is your survival structure. And we were never designed as humans to remain in the stress response. We need it to effectively deal with danger. So if your life was really at threat, that survival structure is designed to keep you safe. It's the freeze, fight, flight, or fawn response. But if we remain in that stress response for more than probably an hour, it's going to start having a significant impact on the physiology of the body. In that stress response, we lose access to the prefrontal cortex. We lose access to the executive functions of the brain that help with regulation, that help with creative thinking, that help us get clarity. We lose access to that higher mind where we receive insight, we get inspired ideas, we get clarity on what it is that's going to move something forward. And we are effectively flooding the body with cortisol, with adrenaline, with noradrenaline. And so we start to experience the physical compromise, the malfunction of the body. But again, we don't necessarily think, oh, do you know what? I've experienced lots of issues with my gut function, or I'm constantly experiencing headaches or back pain or migraines. Actually, this might be stress. So if we believe that stress is something that we need, or also if we believe that our job is always going to be stressful, then that's going to keep us in that survival-based structure. And it reminds me of the stories, the assumptions that are creating somebody's experience. So when people say to me, I'm always going to be busy, that working in HR, it's always going to be stressful. My question is, how do you know that? How do you know that working in HR is always going to be busy and stressful? You cannot predict the future. You cannot know how you're going to feel tomorrow, the next day, a week from now, a month from now, because it hasn't happened yet. But what we do, what the brain does, is it starts to make assumptions based on the past. Based on our past experience, we make a lot of very unconscious assumptions that this is how it's always going to be. And we project that into the future. And a really simple example of this that I've seen time and time and time again is if somebody looks at their calendar and they say, oh, today's going to be mental, today's going to be mad, today's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be a challenge. Well, you don't know that because your day hasn't fully unfolded yet. You know, if you're sat looking at your calendar at 9 o'clock in the morning, you don't know what you're going to be like at 3 o'clock. We can only make assumptions, and we're doing that through thought. And if we are telling the body that it is going to be different, it's going to be difficult, that it is going to be stressful, then that's the experience that we're creating for ourselves. That's the experience that we are designing for ourselves. And it's the opposite of what it is that we really want to experience. Now, when I talk to HR professionals and I say, you know, what would you love your experience to be? And they say, oh, do you know what? I'd love to just continue working in this profession, but I'd love to just experience feeling calm, feeling like this is a job that I can cope with, that I'm grounded, that I've got bandwidth in. I want to feel energized. That's a big one. I want to feel energized in the work that I'm doing. I don't want to feel completely exhausted by the end of the day. I don't want to get home and think all I'm good for is just flopping on the sofa and zoning out in front of Netflix. Now, I'm sure that we've all been there, we've all done that, and this isn't a judgment at all. But when people start to recognize what is actually creating their experience and recognize it's the one thing that they absolutely have control over. It's the one thing that they can change. Well, then change becomes possible. Because there will be aspects of the job that can't be changed. Maybe you are working in a culture that's not particularly supportive. Maybe you are working in a culture that says that they really care about people and are really invested in their people, but their actions speak a very different language. But what we can absolutely create is a different experience. And this is exactly what we do in the HR inner circle, which I will be sharing more details about very soon. I've had a number of people listening to these podcasts and they're like, what is this HR inner circle? I need more information. It's coming. I promise you, it's coming. Because everything that we are experiencing, our experience of the doing, is thought generated. And the thing about our thoughts is thoughts, they come and they go. But if we've made some assumptions, innocently made some assumptions, that working in HR is always going to be stressful, which is a very big universal statement, then we're going to be living and doing from that thought. And the one variable in the mind is thought. Your mind is perfectly healthy. Might not seem like that, but the mind is perfectly healthy. But what distorts it is thinking. And when your thinking gets distorted, it's not your friend. When we don't have the awareness of our thinking, when we don't have the awareness of what filter we're viewing life from, then that is what's creating your experience, which is exactly why you can have 2 days with pretty much the same activity, but one day you can have a very different experience compared to the other. And what the HR inner circle teaches HR professionals is how to navigate your day from your natural state, not the habitual conditioned state where you're experiencing things through that filter lens of your thinking. And one of the biggest things that I've noticed over the years and years of working with people is they don't realize just how in their head they are. And I totally resonate with this because before I came into this line of work, which nearly, well, gosh, I'm in my 15th year of doing this now. But I spent over a decade working in HR. I didn't know any of this. My God, if I'd known even just a slice of this, what a difference it would have made. I didn't realize how much I was constantly overthinking everything, second guessing myself, judging myself. I had this unconscious belief, and I didn't even realize I had it until I started to work in this particular field. But I realized that I'd been operating from this belief that I needed to be seen to be perfect, because underneath that was an identity of not being good enough. And I know that there are millions of people out there that operate from that identity. And that does not mean that there's anything wrong with you. It does not mean that you're broken. It does not mean that anything needs fixing. Every single one of us is operating from a flawed identity of who we think we are. For some people, they think they're an imposter. They think that they're not good enough. They think that they're not worthy. They think that they're inadequate. They think that they can't do right for doing wrong. They think that they don't belong. They think that they're not safe. And at one time or another, that only ever existed as a single thought. And given that our identity got created at a very young age, science tells us that our core beliefs were created by the age of 5. So at some time or another, we've had an experience where we've internalized that to make it mean something about ourselves, to make it mean something about who we think we are. And whether that is capable, not good enough, not worthy, don't belong. If we've never upgraded that sense of self, if we've never challenged that, if we've never said, you know what, actually, I recognize that I've got this belief, but I don't choose to keep investing in that belief, then that belief gets formed as an identity. And it's that identity that's the filter. It's the who we're being when we're doing filter. And so for me, without any of this awareness, it just manifested in this sense that I've got to prove myself. It manifested in long working hours, in being really self-critical, really hard on myself. I had numerous appraisals where I had some amazing managers and they were like, "Sorry, you're really hard on yourself." And I knew that I was. I had an awareness that I was, but it didn't stop me because I didn't know any of what I know now. That being hard on myself, being critical of myself, was maintaining this identity. Now, that in itself is a completely different podcast. So I'd love you to just take a moment and just pause and think, actually, who is it that you are being when you're doing? What are some of the beliefs, identities that you've created about yourself? And what if they weren't true? You know, one of my private clients is a very seasoned HR director. And despite a very successful 20, 25-year career, being really trusted as a right hand to the managing partner, she came to me exhausted, disconnected, numb, burnt out. In fact, I think she'd lost count of the amount of burnout that she'd experienced in her career. And no amount of praise or positive feedback could touch the identity that she'd internalized as I'm an imposter. And the higher that she climbed in her career, the louder that voice became. That identity that had been left unchecked was running the show. And for her, it showed up as overworking, working crazy hours, working weekends, taking calls on holiday, as micromanaging, as perfectionism, as taking responsibility for everybody else's well-being, but not prioritizing her own well-being, as an inability to set really healthy boundaries, especially with her own HR team. But once she began to understand the nature of thought and how thought works, how the identity is shaped by conditioned thinking, habitual thinking, by a survival-based structure, then something really started to shift. She started to see that belief, which effectively was, I'm not good enough, for what it was. It's just a really well practiced thought. It's a bit like if you go for a walk in a forest and there are some pathways that are just very easy to walk through because they're well trodden. And these well trodden pathways are what you've got going on neurologically in the brain. They are very well practiced thoughts that become structures in the brain. They become that filter system that, if you're not aware of who you're being when you're doing, create that filter through how you see yourself, how you see the world, how you see whatever it is that you're dealing with. And the key thing here, and especially with the link to burnout, is that when we are tired, when we're depleted, one of the survival tactics of the human brain is to conserve energy. So it's much, much easier for it to default to this network because it doesn't take the kind of time and energy to keep experiencing these thoughts over and over again. Now, what I would say to this is not about, I've got to start to learn to think positively. That is absolutely not what this is about. Because the idea that you've got to think positively, well, then you've got another thought on your already very, very, very cluttered mind. This is why a lot of CBT fails, because it's giving somebody something else to do with their thinking. But what people find, and this is what my HR director experienced, is when you see and notice that you're simply in your thinking, that what you're experiencing is just a conveyor belt of thought, well, then you're no longer in the thought. This is what metacognition is. It's the ability to observe. And when you're able to really start to view these thought processes, when you're able to start to see this is just really old habitual thinking, because I guarantee these thoughts that you've got going on are not new thoughts. They're not inspired thoughts. They're just the same old crap that's going round and around and around in the mind, this conveyor belt. And you start to understand that actually thought is just a momentary bubble of energy from the mind. Well, then we're back in the present moment. And in the present moment is where we're in our natural state. And we're able to operate from that natural state. Now, it doesn't mean to say that we won't get triggered and find ourselves back in our habits of thought half an hour later. And this is one of the key foundations for the HR circle, is helping HR leaders navigate and embody showing up from their natural state. Because when you're in your natural state, you just naturally experience good feeling thoughts. You naturally experience feeling lighter, feeling happier, feeling calmer, because that's who we are. Who we are comes before thought, comes before this identity that we innocently created about who we think we are. But when you get down, when you're feeling anxious or overwhelmed or depressed or insecure, it can often look like you're going to feel that way for a long time. That something outside of you needs to happen before you can feel better, feel differently. And it's easier to see this with non-emotional thoughts because we don't react to non-emotional thoughts. You know, at the weekend in Edinburgh, given that it was Easter weekend, we're into April, we had a snowstorm. I'm like, are you serious? But it was a non-emotional thought that, oh, it's snowing. I didn't sit there obsessing about the fact that it was snowing. I didn't let the fact that it was snowing create any kind of emotional response. Well, there was a tiny response, which was, are you kidding me? But that just passed because it's a non-emotional thought. You know, the thought, should I have a cup of tea? It's a non-emotional thought. It's only our reaction to thought that fuels its existence. So the more that we're able to become aware and see what is creating their experience, and that thoughts are the only thing that's creating our experience, and thoughts come and go, they're transitionary. Well, then we start to operate from a very, very different state of being. But when you have these thoughts and you see working in HR as hard, as a challenge, as a struggle, as complicated, as messy, when you see that's the symptom of a certain kind of thought, it also stops it from being personal. You can stop it from making meaning over what's happening. But when you're in the thought, from an insecure state, there's no arguing with it. You know, in the community, HR ninjas, there is so much talk, especially with the newer HR professionals, about stress and struggle and burnout. And my heart goes out to these HR professionals because when they're viewing their job from that state, it looks to them like that's the truth. And if you try to show them something else, it's where all the yes, but thoughts come out. When you're feeling down and you look around you, the mind does a great job of creating this dialogue of why. It's, as I said earlier, it's the cause and effect. It's one of those days where you're saying, it's my job. My boss is a prick. It's this ER case. It's just working in HR. And the last thing we consider is, what if I'm creating this? Where's my focus of attention? What am I making this situation mean? What am I accepting as true or real? So, what are the most repetitive, habitual thoughts that you have about yourself? Are these thoughts offering you anything new? When you identify those habitual, repetitive thoughts, especially the thoughts about yourself, your identity, who it is that you think you are, what makes you believe that? Who would you be without that? What if it was just a thought? What if it was just a story? What if who you are isn't that thought, isn't that story? It's just looked like that for a really long time because you didn't have this understanding. You didn't understand the nature of thought, the nature of how the mind works. And if you weren't showing up from that thought, if you weren't navigating your day from that thought, from these conditioned habitual responses, who would you be? Imagine navigating your day feeling light, feeling like you've got room to breathe, that you have emotional capacity, that you're navigating your day from a place of emotional regulation, of calm, of confidence. What would that give you that you don't already have? How powerful would it be for you to navigate your day? What would you be able to achieve? How would you be able to influence your internal stakeholders? How much more energy would that give you? And I'm going to leave you to contemplate that. But know that all of that is absolutely possible. Now, I would love to know what insights, what realizations, what's really resonated with you from today's episode. So please do feel free to leave your comments in the comments section. And if you are eager to find out more about the HR Inner Circle, drop me an email, info@themindsolution.com. But wishing you a wonderful present day. And until next time, bye bye for now.